everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of Northern Lights, Living in Good Health Together. I'm so happy you've chose to join us today. And as always, I'm delighted to be here with our co-host and chair of the Wake County Northern Regional Center Community Advisory Committee for the North, Miss Betty Murchison, who I always feel like, why even bother introducing Betty? Because everybody in Wake County knows her. But yeah, so that is, in fact, Betty. We're both super excited to be here with you today. And as you know, we focus every month on an issue that we think is important to the community. And we have three really wonderful speakers lined up today, and we'll introduce them in a moment. But we wanted to put a spotlight today on racial disparities in the education system. And so we've got our long title, Educational and Disparities in Historically Marginalized Populations. And as I said, we have three really great speakers lined up here today. I'm trying to get my slide to progress. So just as we always do, I wanted to give a little background on who's bringing this show to you and just sort of recognize the effort of many folks. You'll see Betty and I on screen, but there's a lot of folks behind the scene that make this happen. So the Northern Regional Community Advocacy Committee, or the folks that you see on your screen right there, it's local leaders that work specifically with Wake County to help make sure that services we're providing are what the community actually needs. And it also is a great way for us to make sure there's no duplication of services, because some of the great folks you see on your screen there actually are in the business of providing services to a lot of the clients that we serve in Wake County Health and Human Services. So hats off to all of them. You'll see Betty again in the upper left. And then I just want to bring attention to Rachel, who is there in the middle. She is the one that's allowing us to use this wonderful software so we can simulcast today's episode both on Facebook Live as well as on the Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel. So thanks, Rachel, as always, for that. So what is Northern Lights? It's sort of this big idea that Betty came up with at the beginning of this year, just in retrospect and looking back to 2020. She wanted us to focus on health and healing. What a great idea. I mean, when is that ever a bad idea, really? But so I'm going to let her sort of explain the model and what we're looking to do. So Betty?
Thank you, Ross. And it is my pleasure to be here with you once again. I call Ross my partner in crime. And I really enjoy working with him and finding our way. So the acronym Northern Lights, LIGHTS, Living in Good Health Together, that was Ross's idea. And I like the illusion that think of northern lights that you see in Alaska, and they only come around once in a while and they illuminate things. And so when we were talking about how to move forward this year after going through a pandemic that none of us have ever seen before, I wanted us to focus on health and healing. I think we've got to look at healing our communities and looking at what we need to do to make all of our communities healthier. So we started on this journey, and we want to make sure that we're surfacing race relations. We want to talk about why that's important in this country, in our communities, and what we can do to improve things. So many of us knew about the health disparities in our communities long before COVID hit. But we want to be able to talk about the health disparities, and how we can all play a part in creating a healthier environment for everyone. And then we wanted to expand partnerships. There are many nonprofits that are doing the work in the community. They aren't often recognized for all the things they do, whether they're feeding people or tutoring children after school. We want to strengthen those partnerships, and we want to be able to make good referrals from Wake County Human Services, which they do a great job, but they can't reach everybody in every phase of their life and what they need. So making sure we have strong partnerships was very important to me. And then education and outreach. Information is no good if it's not shared. So that's the way Northern Lights was born, using social media and being able to get a message out to the community that can be beneficial to where they are and what they need to know. So I'm really excited about the three community leaders who will be presenting today. I think it will be beneficial for folks with children in school as well as community leaders as we look to where we can best use our resources. I think we'll get some direction from the amazing presenters that are on our panel today.
All right. Thank you so much, Betty. And I can see a little behind the scenes information here. Our first speaker is Dr. Craston Artis, and we are having a little bit of technical difficulty, and I wanted to just give him an opportunity to unmute and see if his mic is not. And if you can hear us okay, I'd like to give you just a brief bio. And well, first of all you need to know about him is what he's just gone through to even be here with us today. So he's somebody that doesn't give up, that's for sure. But he's a 20 plus year educator, and he's currently working as co-founder of the EdTech company and consulting for organizations leading education and community economic development initiatives. So he's helped establish the Community Equity Leadership Team, which is a consortium of community organizations functioning as the Wake County Public School liaisons for issues related to equity. So Dr. Artis, if you're ready, I can progress through.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Betty. Thank you, everyone who's helped organize this in front of and behind the scenes. I appreciate it. Unfortunately, yeah, as you said, I had some difficulties with the audio. And as flattering as it is, I am not a doctor, but feel free to call me that if you'd like. But I'm really excited to be here. First, let me say I am checking out my T-shirt. I'm wearing a shirt to commemorate homecoming for my alma mater, North Carolina A&T. But it's also to highlight HBCUs in our discussion of educational disparities. And so I thought I would do both, right? So with that, I wanted to spend a little bit of time. That's perfect. I want to spend a little bit of time kind of setting the stage for our discussion. I'm leaning heavily on a presentation by CREED, the Center for Racial Equity in Education, headed up here in North Carolina by James Ford, astounding young man who's a former North Carolina Teacher of the Year and now is on the State Board of Education. And he started this organization that's put together a good deal of information around disparities across the state, which we can use as a backdrop for discussing things here in Wake County. And so I don't want to read from a slide, but I want you to just understand when we talk about disparities, there's lots of ways to look at that. There's kind of a community view. There's a social or political view. I want you to have in mind the way it rolls out, the way it plays out in schools, and what numbers you can actually look at, numbers you can actually go ask a district for that relate to disparities, and so that you can kind of get your hands around what that means for a school and a district, and the kinds of advocacy you can move forward. And so we're talking about honors courses. This has to do with access that students have to those honor courses, being pushed into them or being promoted to them. Advanced placement courses, which is the same thing, and we know that translates into graduation, both success and post-graduation success. The academically, intellectually gifted, those labelings, those categorizing, and those opportunities that those students get. Of course, also with exceptional children, and also when we get some of the more popular or known statistics around discipline data, students who are disciplined, students of different backgrounds who may commit the same act but are disciplined completely different. Those trends are very evident in schools today. Chronic absenteeism, which of course relates to a lot of the other at home and in community supports that may or may not exist, that sometimes schools exacerbate within the buildings. And then of course the teachers, the access to high quality teachers, the prevalence or pooling of novice teachers, or less experienced teachers in certain schools, and even within schools, teaching certain students within those schools. So so there's lots of dimensions here to it, but I want you to be able to wrap your mind around some specifics, right? And so I thought it was really good. The report Cree did, how they outlined 3 areas of intervention. And so these are larger state and district level kinds of policy recommendations. But again, as you look to advocate locally, you can kind of harken back to them as you push your local district or school to address some of these issues. And one of them, of course, is about equity access to rigorous coursework. We know that whether you're talking about getting to college or completing college, or more importantly, just leaving the K-12 space and moving into adulthood with the types of skills that are necessary to survive and function in our society, we know students need access to rigorous coursework. And that doesn't just mean more work. It doesn't just mean harder work, but it means not just the content, but the way the content is taught in a way that pushes thinking and pushes skill level beyond where a student is, and sometimes beyond where a teacher may think the student can perform. And so even when we get into mindsets of teachers, that's very important as to how it relates to how rigorous coursework is delivered. And then also another intervention is to eliminate the racialized patterns of school discipline. School discipline plays such a large part, not only in the psyche of the student who's receiving the discipline, but also in the way that the educators that deal with that student deal with them going forward, knowing that the student, quote unquote, gets in trouble all the time. And then of course, we move into their interaction with SROs and other law enforcement entities that may be stepping in when there are many, many, many other interventions that needed to be performed prior to that, such as restorative justice practices and whatnot. And then their third one was equitable deployment of experienced and effective and committed teachers. And so we already know that there is a bit of a, not a bit, but a large gulf in not only the number of people going into teaching, but it's exacerbated by those who are leaving teaching. And so again, to highlight HBCUs, they're going to play a pivotal role in producing teachers of color that can then go into the classroom and help disrupt some of these disparities, whether it's just their presence, promoting the growth of students, particularly Black students, as was shown in a recent study, or whether it's, again, just being experienced and effective and being in a classroom where a school may have become a dumping ground for low performing teachers, or a student may just be stuck due to not having other choices and has to navigate, and their parents have to navigate a teacher that is less accomplished. And while, you know, being a former teacher, I don't want to give up on any teachers. Now, there are definitely people who don't need to be in the classroom, but for the most part, people go into teaching with a passion and love for it. And we want to continue to spark that and open up that path for them to continue to grow in their profession. And so being committed to not just hiring, but also supporting and training of those teachers is an important piece to remember. And so I know Litha and Terrance are going to speak more about different areas of advocacy, but I just wanted to talk specifically to the Community Equity Leadership Team, and Litha was a former facilitator of it, so she definitely knows their work as well. They were started as a consortium of community organizations, and we have parents and advocates and educators, but what we really need are people who come to the table with certain goodies, and those goodies, I would say, are coming to the table ready with a specific issue. So sometimes, you join groups and they end up being gripe sessions, or they end up being, people end up discussing around an issue, not really getting to what they're passionate about. And so my suggestion is, if you want to join the group, please come with a specific issue or concern, and be ready to voice that, right? And then also kind of do a resources audit and think about what are the resources that you can bring to bear. Who do you know? What information do you have that you could share? What kind of research have you already done that you can bring to the table and present to the group when needed? And then also be ready to just plug in with whatever it is you're ready to do, whether it's make phone calls, attend school board meetings, do some research behind the scenes. Be ready to let us know how you want to be plugged in, and we will definitely be able to plug you in. And so I encourage everyone who is passionate about equity and education, who's passionate about moving that needle forward for students in Wake County, to join the Community Equity Leadership Team. I believe earlier my contact information was scrolling. So definitely contact me for more information about that. And the organization is meant to push forward policy and advocacy. And so that's what we will continue to do.
Thank you so much, Craston. This was very helpful and very informative. I was taking notes fast as I could, but then it dawned on me I can go back and look at the show anytime I want to see it on Facebook Live, right? But I'm such a note taker. But great information. Thank you.
No problem.
We have any questions from the audience? I don't know that we do. But we're going to bring everyone back on screen at the very end just to have a panel discussion. But it's certainly so far, I mean, it's super interesting, and you're getting a good sense of the quality of presentation we're receiving here today. So thank you very much, Craston. And to keep that rolling, I'd like to pull up Litha Muhammad, who is moving today. Is that right, Litha?
That's right.
I just like the amount of dedication these folks have demonstrated. And she was the first one here as well. So I want to thank her for that. And I've got a bio here for Litha. I'm just going to review it real quick with y'all. Litha Muhammad is the executive director of the Education Justice Alliance based here in Raleigh. As you're working to advance, the organization's mission is to dismantle the school to prison and school to deportation pipeline in her local school district. So Wake County Public Schools is someone she's working with to advance equity in public education, and really kind of looking across the whole state to do that as well. And she believes in working with parents, students, and families that are directly impacted by the issues that we're talking about here today. She believes that's the most effective way for her to contribute. And contribute, she certainly does. She is the co-chair in fundraising for the National Dignity in School campaign. She also serves on the coordinating committee for Every Child North Carolina, a statewide coalition working to ensure equitable funding for our public schools. She's a member of the Muslims for Social Justice and on the steering committee for the movement to end racism and Islamophobia. And then she puts, and I always love this, that she is a wife and mother of one school-aged child and 2 young adults. So Litha, we're going to turn it over to you.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Betty and Ross, for having me on the program today. Excited to be here and in conjunction with my fellow panelists, Craston and Terrance, who you'll meet a little bit later. The work that I'm doing currently as the executive director and one of the founding members of my organization, Education Justice Alliance, really was born out of my love and my need as a parent of Black students to ensure equity. I first started seeing inequity show up as the parent of a first grader then at that time in Wake County Public Schools. And as my oldest, who started first grade in Wake County, matriculated through, I kept seeing issues pop up around access to higher level AG courses or AG determination. I started seeing Black boys and other children of color being stigmatized in the classroom at the elementary school level. I started to see as she matriculated into middle school, the same thing happening. She was the only student placed in a higher level math class, only Black student, I should say. And for me as a parent, that greatly concerned me. And so I started digging a little deeper. Her middle school had a program through the local YWCA called Study Circles, and it was based off of the book Courageous Conversations About Race. And it really took a look at the school community. It brought together parents and students and other educators to look at the ways in which structural and institutional racism impact the school. And for me, it was the first time as a parent where I had historical context to match the experience I had been having with my daughter, but also with other students around her. And so, I went through that program through the Y at the local middle school, and then the Y had a parent advocacy work group that they had started. They had a parent leadership academy that I went through that summer, and it just lit a fire in me. So, I joined all the programs that the Y had, and then unfortunately, the YWCA in Southeast Raleigh closed their doors abruptly at the end of 2011. And there was a group of us as parents and grandparents and community advocates who did not want the work that we have been doing to hold Wake County accountable, in particular around disparities in discipline and the ways in which Black boys were being suspended and pushed out of schools. We didn't want that work to stop. And so we came together in a community process through meetings and lots of conversation, and we joined or created Education Justice Alliance. And so I've always been a part of this organization, and I was blessed and fortunate to be hired as our first full-time director in 2017. And really the work of my organization is rooted in community. It's rooted in working with parents. When we think about the parents that we work with, it's Black and brown working class parents and their students. So it's an opportunity to connect with parents and students around some of those real issues that Craston laid out in his presentation when he laid out and talked about the data and the inequity that exists, unfortunately, across our state. When we look at who has access to higher education, who has access in the K through 12 space to higher level courses, whether it's, in third grade when kids are determined to be academically gifted and tracked that way, or it's when they get to, middle school and they're exposed to higher level math courses. And so my work is really about creating space for parents to recognize that they have power first and foremost. When I think of myself as a parent and when I talk to other parents, I talk from the standpoint of we're the subject matter experts when it comes to our young people. And unfortunately, what happens sometimes when you're working with systems or larger systems, or you're a person who may come to that space, maybe you didn't have formal education, maybe you had a bad experience yourself as a young person in school, and that impacts your ability sometimes to maybe fully show up for your student, or even to know that you can advocate and push for things. I create that space. We create that space in Education Justice Alliance for parents to know that they have these rights, that they have power, that they're the expert when it comes to their child. Maybe there's some background information they need to know. Maybe we need to look through the code of conduct for their school district, whether it's Wake County or a different district, right? Maybe there's a particular issue in terms of they're not getting the supports they need. Maybe they need an IEP, an individualized education plan. They don't know the steps of how to get it, or they've been turned down, right? They've come to their child's teacher to say, I think something's going on, and that hasn't been taken seriously, right? So we create space to help parents know what their rights are, how to advocate, but then how to come together, not only on an individual level, but also collectively, right? Because there's power as a collective. There's power when we come together, like Craston also mentioned, at the community equity leadership team level, when we come together as a group and understand the issue that's happening, and then what we can do from the standpoint of concerned citizens, our parents, our grandparents, to push to have something change. It's a policy. There's a technology policy that was just approved yesterday in Wake County. Well, we did work Monday and even weeks before to talk about some of the red flags that we saw in that policy, right? We sent letters to the school board. We met individually with school board members. We bring parents and students to those kind of spaces so that they can speak directly to school board members about what their concerns are or what their issues are, right? We are creating space for young people who are to me, the people closest to this problem. When we talk about inequity in our public education system, they're the most directly impacted. So we're creating space for young people to tell us what that impact is, what the issue is. Because as a parent, I can have my eye on something and I can think this is the problem, but actually my children, and my last one in school right now is a 15-year-old, my son, he's in 10th grade, and he's quick to tell me if something's not right. But what would it look like, right, if we continually made space for young people to let us know what the issue is in their schools, but also to tell us what they dream about, what they see as the solution, because they actually have the solutions. It's just sometimes we adults don't have the foresight to listen to those solutions. And so within Education Justice Alliance, we're also working to navigate and cultivate spaces for young people to fully step into their power as young people and to craft, to name the issues that they face, but also to craft the solutions. And then we will work to create space for them to speak to decision makers, right? Which is, when we talk about equity in education, in particular in Wake County, that's school board members. They're the ones that write the policies. They're the ones that pass the policy. And so those are the folks that they need to be talking to if there's some kind of issue going on. And then, same thing with parents, right? We're still cultivating that space with parents as well. Because I always also say young people are closest to the problem, but nothing happens to a young person within a school that doesn't impact that young person's parents or family, whoever their support system is. And so, we at Education Justice Alliance, we follow an intergenerational model of community organizing where we recognize that we're stronger together. So we create separate space for parents to cultivate their power, and then we create space for young people to do the same. And then we bring those folks together when it makes sense to do so. And so one of the formal ways that this work is done for us is we do like a parent power institute each year. We try to do it twice a year in the spring and fall, winter session. And it's to help parents understand, what their rights are, to understand the history of public education in this country. A lot of our parents are Latinx or Latino parents, right, who come from different countries and need to be oriented or understand the American education system and understand that they have a right to ask certain questions, to challenge if something isn't right. And we try to create that space through our Parent Power Institute for our parents. And then we host monthly parent meetings. So especially now in the time of COVID and when COVID started, we found and heard from our community of parents and students that folks were really struggling, not just from the health aspect of COVID, because we know COVID has had a tremendous health impact on our communities, but it's also had, an impact on our financial situation. It's had an impact on our mental health state. So we try to cultivate space for our parents to lean into and support each other, to talk about issues that they're coming across, to figure out ways that we can provide resources to help our parents as they navigate through, a global pandemic, a time that a lot of us have never lived through in our lives. And so we're really here at Education Justice Alliance to really be an asset and a support and a space for parents and students to push for the equity that we all deserve in this state, in this city, in this district, but in this country in general. And so I think having this conversation with you all today is like a really important step to help the larger community. Sometimes when you're not you don't have students in school yourself or grandchildren, you're a little further away from the problem. So I think this conversation is timely in raising the issue of disparity that currently exists in Wake County and across the state, to think about ways that we can disrupt that disparity and inequity. Thank you.
Wow. Wow, That was great information. I wasn't aware, and I try to make sure I'm aware of what's going on around the county, because even though I no longer run a community center, I still have people who contact me for information about things, and I wasn't aware of all the things you offer, Letha. So I will certainly be in touch with the EJA afterwards. I think we have a question for you. Where would you start when communicating with parents to advocate for their child, helping parents to see they have the power to make a difference, a change in mindset? Thank you,
Yep.
Vivica.
That's an excellent question. I always start with the first off, what's going on? What's the issue? And then you ask parents, what is it that you want? What do you want to change? What do you want to happen as a result of this experience that you all are having? And as parents talk about this, they know what they want. They know what their children deserve. And so sometimes it's about creating the space to help them see the steps that they can take to do that. And as much as I can, and we're a small organization, if I need to walk alongside them, if we have to have a call to talk through what policy says, and this is how you do X, Y, Z, we do that. And then we create space to invite those individual parents to our collective space, right? We have monthly parent support meetings. Come join us there. Pre-COVID, we hosted events in the community, whether it's a session for parents to just come and let us know the things that they're seeing in their school, or it's a session for young people to come. So as much as you can, you create space for those parents to tell you what it is that they want, and then you connect them to that space or help them see where they can push to get that.
And you're right. You brought up a very good point. Sometimes it's a matter of sharing information, and other times you've got to walk people through that journey. They've had, as you said, bad experiences themselves, or they don't feel they have the education. This is what my experience has been with some parents. They don't feel they have the education to be able to go and talk to a teacher or a principal about their child. And so there are situations where those of us who can are called to walk with people on that journey. And I love that you said young people are proximate to the problem. Brian Stevenson with the Equal Justice Initiative, that's his thing. You talk to the people who are proximate to the problem. And a side note, I too am a study circle graduate, and held study circles at Wakefield High School with the guidance counselor there, and held them in the town of Wake Forest. And so I loved study circles on race that the YWCA used to institute. So yes to all you said. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I look forward to coming back later and answering more questions, or continuing this discussion.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much. And as you can see, our final speaker today is Dr. Ruth of North Carolina State University, among other things. And I'll get into his bio in a second, but I just love this photo so much. When I was looking in preparation for the show for something on each of the presenters, and I stumbled across this, and it's just this photo is just so rich. And I don't know if this is a favorite around your household or not, but to see Terrance there with his son, and Terrance is obviously engaged, but his son is there. And I don't know if he's just building blocks or doing something, but it looks like he's just as engaged. Like father, like son is like what the image that comes to my mind. And it's just so clear that he has that inquisitive mind, just like I suspect you do, Dr. Ruth. So a brief bio on Dr. Ruth. He is a North Carolina State professor in the Department of Social Work, and he's one of the newest research fellows for North Carolina State's African American Center. He also spearheaded the launch of a social justice foundation that merged into a partnership with United Way to form the Art Fund for the Triangle. Dr. Ruth is part of the efforts to develop Wake County's child welfare divisional goals. Thank you for that. On race and engagement of fathers of color. He's a former teacher, principal, and executive director of NAACP North Carolina State Conference. So, like all our speakers, very heavily credentialed and an expert in the field. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity. And this is one of our favorite photos. This was my son's Thomas the Train obsession. But what's unique about this photo, and I'm glad that you picked it out without me and you ever talking, is this is why this issue matters to me. My son is a public school student. But you have me following the 2021 Grassroots Empowerment Award winner, Litha Muhammad. And so I think she should have went last, but congratulations, Litha, on your award from the NC Justice Center. I come to you as a former teacher, former principal. I'm currently, as was stated, a professor at NC State University. But I have a son that's in public schools in Wake County. So I am personally invested in the disparities that exist. Most of my experiences rest in my opinion, in the downstream, where I've received, in my experience, the long-term suspended students or the students who are engaged in the juvenile justice system. So as it relates to racial disparities, I believe that this state, that our cities and our county have a commitment, a long-standing commitment to reducing inequities in African-American families and communities as it relates to schools. We know that communities pour into the school unit rather than the reverse. And so for me, I also think that every individual should have a longstanding commitment to addressing racial disparities. The Leandra report, which I believe Craston touched on, has spotlighted the need to reevaluate our efforts to address educational racial disparities. And I think that we should take a range of approaches to carrying out our goals for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think most prominent, what you heard with Litha and with Craston, most prominent are our community action, our advocacy. I have been an educator in other states, in other cities. But in this state, you see this overlap of educator and advocacy. And it's a closer relationship than I have experienced in other states. And so I think that saturation is a positive thing in terms of what we have to work with, the soil which we have to work from to address racial inequities. I believe that in order to improve the learning experience for all students, those who have been, in my opinion, historically marginalized, and I just learned this word from a mentor of mine, marginalized and minoritized, must have the support they need to thrive, especially when the learning environment is not dominated by profiles that look like them. And this idea of just simply admitting more students of color, it doesn't necessarily translate into opportunity, is what we found. Without the necessary and appropriate resources being made to create students who have diverse learning needs and social integration preferences that can feel, so that they feel valued and appreciated for what they bring to the learning experience in the classroom. Oftentimes, we have learning environments where the student feels that they're entering the learning space with a deficit. But I think there's, I call it a default negative. I think there's a default negative. Even though I have a PhD, by default, I must prove to you, because of my race, that I am an intelligent being. Even though I have never committed a crime, by default, I must prove to you that I'm not a dangerous individual. And so these students enter these environments with this default negative. And what does it mean to create a learning environment where the student is expected to bring a learning experience that will benefit the classroom? I think schools tend to focus on underrepresented groups of students that are integrating into dominant spaces, but do very little to prepare the existing student population for the integration of students of colors. Thus, the students with the marginalized experience arrive to school to receive more attention on how to and who to adjust to. And I think a more equitable approach to diversity and inclusion in schools would be to hold listening sessions for existing students, teachers, and staff to learn how to create a campus or a school culture that understands the influence and impact of the existing dominant culture on those who are coming from a marginalized or minoritized experience. And so I believe that it's essential that we create and implement a new model of diversity and inclusion across schools. This state has more education or educational researchers than you can imagine. We have the numbers, we have the research, we have the evaluations, we have the assessments. We know that the disparities exist in student outcomes as it relates to special education services. But even if you look at the top performing students, the gifted and talented students, there's even disparities in those places. We know, Letha just shared, the disparities in discipline. There's disparities in graduation rates, career readiness, even teacher representation. In this last part, we don't talk about as much, but there's even disparities in perceived intelligence. These experiences inform my diversity perspective, my diversity philosophy, and my approach to what does it mean to address disparities. In my experience, I received students who were long-term suspended, but when we gave our own assessment, they were already ready for college. I received students, and the trends that I seen were trends that can be addressed prior to coming to an isolated, punitive environment. And so for me, I think there's more work to be done upstream. I think that's why Craston and Litha Muhammed are celebrated for their work, because it's very preventative in several measures. But I also think if we look at what's the conversation that is existing right now in North Carolina around the Leandro report, we have a deficit of funding for schools. We have a deficit of ideas. What Litha Muhammad is providing in her organization, that was from the community. Then we have a deficit of just courage. And I think we're at a moment where we could turn a page. We have a judge who's leading the case leading the judgment on the Leandro case that's trying to force funding for work. We have a coalition of education advocates that are ready to engage around this work. And then also we have community leaders that are saturated across the state that are willing to engage in their volunteer time this work to increase equity, not just in the classroom, but also in community. And so I am honored to just be in a space where there's a thin line between being an educator and being an advocate. And so for me, I'm glad that my son is growing up in this place that has such a rich history of social justice, but also has a rich history of fighting for racial equity and challenging racial disparities in education. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Wow. What a powerful presentation. And I just wrote down something that you said, and I'm sure everybody probably heard a little bit of gold themselves, but you talked about the deficit of funding, but there's also perhaps more worrisome deficit of ideas and the deficit of courage. I think sometimes it's too easy to just look at the surface and say there's not enough people of color, so we need to add them. But what does that translate to them being successful? No. We need more funding for the schools, but does that really change if there's a deficit of courage, if there's a deficit of ideas? No. So what a rich conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will add a deficit of hope in some cases, that there's a deficit of hope for people in the community, except when they listen to people like these three wonderful presenters we have on here today. Thank you so much, Dr. Ruth. And I know you took time out of your busy campaign schedule because you're also running for mayor of Raleigh. So we appreciate every one of you pushing through to be with us today. So I think we can bring everybody back on now and move to questions. While we're waiting for them to come in from the audience, I have one I'd love for all three of you to address if you could. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but recently the leading pediatric group, which include the American Academy of Pediatrics, Children's Hospital Association, and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. And this group represents 77,000 physicians and 200 children's hospitals. These are the nation's leading expert in pediatric health, who issued an urgent warning declaring the mental health crisis among our children is so dire that it has become a national emergency. I've never heard of that before. I don't know if you guys have, but they said it's been exacerbated. The childhood mental health concerns already steady rising over the past decade, but thanks to coronavirus, as well as racial inequality, this is what they said, has exacerbated the challenges, and that children of color are more impacted by this, by attempted suicide rates, mental health crisis than any other children. So can you guys speak to that, please?
Yep, I'll hop in first because this is something I'm really passionate about as we think about young people returning back to school after a year to a year and a half being virtual and at home. And we've recognized, I talked about it earlier in my comments, right, that impact of the coronavirus having so many impacts on our communities, on our families, that one of the things that our organization did early on, we started meeting with Wake County's Office of Equity Affairs to say, hey, okay, what is it that the district can put in place to support young people as a result of experiencing the coronavirus? What type of supports can you all put in place to help parents? What information can you send out, right? That could be a resource for parents dealing not only with their own mental health challenges, but recognizing that their young people are struggling. And then when it was time to go back to school, we're ringing that same alarm. And so one of the things that I kept saying, I've said this to board members, and I'm going to keep beating this drum, is that young people, when they're struggling, and if you're a parent, if you've had any connection with young people, if they're struggling, that struggle will show up in their behavior. And what would it look like to create space in our schools to value young people first and foremost, to value their mental health first and foremost, and to recognize that what we see as negative behaviors are oftentimes associated with something else? And if we could take resources, Dr. Ruth talked about Leandro and the inequity in our funding in North Carolina. What would it look like to prioritize resources that came down to our schools, that created actual spaces within schools that address the mental health concerns? Because let's face it, our young people spend 7 to 8 hours in a school building. I don't want a young person who's struggling mentally because of the impact of the coronavirus and racism in general, because let's recognize that, racism has been around way before coronavirus. And so the impact to their mental health was already there. I don't want them to be further traumatized or harmed because the adult in the building doesn't have the skills or the knowledge to recognize that this negative behavior is actually a manifestation of their mental health. And instead of us providing them supports for that, we're pushing them out of schools. We're suspending kids. We're referring them to law enforcement. We're expelling them. What is that doing to our young people? So I love that all of these health professionals have come together and they're ringing and sounding the alarm. And I encourage all of us to do the same, right? If it's your local school, ask them what kind of supports are in place to help young people. What kind of supports do they have to stop pushing young people out the door through suspensions and expulsions and referrals to law enforcement? Our organization is pushing the district, Wake County, to create crisis intervention workers within the school that have been trained with mental health training, who has had training around conflict resolution, who are there to establish relationships, not only with the students, but also with the staff. And so therefore, if something is happening or getting ready to happen, or someone is on the verge of a crisis, they have a trusted individual in that building that they recognize that they can go to that could potentially stop something from happening. And so we're trying to encourage the district to prioritize resources for something like that in some of our schools, even as a pilot to start off, so that we can stop criminalizing behavior that is normal to young people. And I'll be quiet there and let one of my other folks speak.
That's powerful.
Now, I mean, this is the award winner's backyard. I don't want to. But I spent quite a bit of time traveling the state talking about adverse childhood experience, right? That was the buzz for a good amount of time. Then it shifted from there. They said, well, we're looking at this child, but what about adverse community experiences? So now they're saying, well, how do we look at these communities that have adversity? What's the impact and trends that are coming from these experiences? And we're seeing where in certain communities, there's gunshots every night, or there is violent acts between parents, or there is violent acts between children, or there is lack of food, or there's such a compound interest around these issues and experiences, but the expectation in terms of performance is the same. And so it's amazing to me when we zoom into adverse childhood experiences, how cautious and sensitive we were to that individual. I think we should shift that same sensitivity to community itself.
Wow. Craston, would you like to weigh in on this too?
Unfortunately, I probably don't have too much to add from these other two, but unfortunately, my connection went out. What was the question?
Oh, it's about the pediatricians who have declared mental health crisis a national emergency for children, and in particular, children of color, in addition to COVID, are also dealing with race and racism, and that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, the first thing it makes me think of, and I was having a conversation, I believe it is in the room on Clubhouse with some educators about teachers' unions and things that teachers fight for. And I was talking about one of the, usually the things at the top of the list is school counselors. And even when you look at budget discussions, school counselors. And so I think it's interesting that this deficit or mental health issues going unaddressed has been something on the mind of educators for a while. And fortunately, I guess you could say COVID has highlighted that. And I think much like the social activism we've seen in the last couple of years, coupling it with issues of race has brought it to the forefront even more. And unfortunately, it takes, those with certain letters behind their names to legitimize a specific perspective, but I'm glad that they're bringing that to the forefront, and it should help as we go into discussions of budgets, as we talk about resources that students need, and of course, as we drill down to what students of color need. I think it can only help that situation.
Thank you. Thank you, all three. I think we have a question from our audience. Okay, good. How are ACEs being addressed in the work you're doing? You just brought those up.
I would say one, I'm working with Public School First NC. So Public School First NC is also the group that's behind the bill to Craston's point, to increase the number of support professionals, social workers, therapists, psychologists in schools. What I found in the workshop that we conduct, we do creating trauma-informed PTA, creating trauma-informed schools, and then also creating trauma-informed communities. And what we found is the very people we're training to create the trauma-informed environment for the children have yet to deal with their own trauma. Yeah. And so what we're seeing adults who, when we're training them, they're being exposed to their own personal journeys as well. And if you know anything about ACEs, they give you a score. And these scores that we are observing from teachers, from PTA members, they're high. And we're expecting them to create trauma-sensitive school environments. So there's a larger community conversation that's desired and needed, and a larger community investment of resources that's needed to address the ACEs that you're referencing in the question.
Yeah, and my work is about shifting the culture and climate in schools. And so I think if we shifted our culture and our climate to recognize that some young people will come to the building with an ACEs score, if not all young people, right? They will come having experienced some form of trauma that impacts the way they can show up in that building. But if we shift the culture to say, you're still welcomed here, and hold up, what's going on? Oh, I never forget, the most powerful experience I've had was when my now 18-year-old was in third grade, and there was one young man in her class that was cutting up, clearly cutting up. And I never forget his teacher, the teacher at the time bowed, she lowered herself to his eye level, and she said to him, "Hey, did you eat breakfast this morning?" And he quietly said no. And she said, "I have something for you." Pulled him to the side, got a snack out, gave him that snack, allowed him to sit to himself, a way to eat the snack, and then rejoin class. That was the most powerful example for me of an educator recognizing that this young man was showing up and he was responding to the fact that he was hungry, that he didn't get to leave his home with a meal this morning, and it was creating a certain behavior for him in that classroom. What if our schools in general did that? What if it wasn't a one-off, right? It's one-off as one educator or two educators. What if the whole building, everybody in the school operated that way? I guarantee you we would have a transformed school environment, and that school environment transforming like that would actually have a ripple effect to transform other environments as well.
Yeah, I love both of those comments, and it reminds me of when I started out teaching in Chicago on the South Side, and you know, to your point of your story, Litha, that's exactly the way we want an educator to approach that situation. It's interesting because my business partner and I are digging into the process of student teaching and looking at all the elements that need to go into training teachers. And you can't test, what you just said, you can't test that on, you can't mark it on an assessment. You can't necessarily, there's no artifact that a student teacher has to deliver to show they can do that, but that level of empathy and willingness to extend yourself is what's needed, like you said, school-wide in certain environments. And if we can all kind of wrap our minds around how important that is and what that looks like, and then support the administrators and educators in those buildings to do that, it would go a long way to alleviating a lot of issues that people complain about, that we spend a lot of money trying to solve, and can be done fairly easily with empathy and a helping hand.
Depositing into students' emotional bank accounts, says Toshiba Rice. She's another champion for children in our communities. And we appreciate you, Toshiba, and all the work that you're doing as well. You very well could have been a part of this panel had we had more time, because you bring a lot of experience and wisdom to this work as well. I hate to wrap up, Ross.
I know. No, I couldn't believe it when I looked at the time. I'm like, are you serious? It's been an hour already? Wow.
I know. With these experts here, these community leaders, we could easily have a full day workshop, and that might be something in the future once you get past election season and the holidays. But from the bottom of my heart, I thank all of you for what you're doing in our communities, for your not only educators but advocates. And I really already got someone raising their hand saying they want to host something in Roseville. So we're going to take the show on the road. That's our host, Rachel. So I hope that more people will count on you all for the expertise that you have and the support they need. I am all in. If there's anything I can do, I'm a parent educator and have some knowledge of this work. So just know that, and I know there are many others out in the community who would also like to be engaged and involved. So Ross, I'll turn it over to you to wrap us up.
Yeah, I can't end it any better than what you just said. Thank you all to our distinguished panel and our guests today. You guys, best show ever. I mean, it was awesome and a lot of great information. And so next month, Betty and I have talked a little bit about this. We plan to focus going into the holiday season on local resources. Now, our show is typically on the last Wednesday of the month, but that's the day before Thanksgiving, so we might tweak that a little bit, but we'll certainly have that information posted on our Facebook page if we decide to tweak it. But please join us again next month. And just know, for your friends and your families that could not join us live today, this will live on our Facebook page indefinitely. So please just point them to Facebook, and they'll also have access to these three distinguished panelists' contact information if they do that and they want to follow up with them specifically. So thank you all again so much. We look forward to seeing everyone again next month. And then
I want to pay one last tribute to our panelists. And 100 years from now will not matter what my bank account was, or the sort of house I lived in, or the kind of car I drove, but the world may be better because I was important in the life of a child. And I attribute that to the work that the three of you are doing. And I appreciate you all so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Betty and Ross. I appreciate you all. Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.